I'm going to go ahead and convene the Educator Effectiveness Committee meeting to order. May I have a roll call?
Ms. Beebe? Here. Ms. Beebe's present. Mr. Bennett? Mr. Bennett's absent. Ms. Bopey? Here. Ms. Bopey's present. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford's absent. Ms. Askew?
Here.
Ms. Askew's present. Mr. Garvey? Here. Mr. Garvey's present. Mr. Gill?
Present.
Mr. Gill's present. Ms. Hill? Ms. Hill is absent. Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Lee is present. Ms. Orange Jones? Ms. Orange Jones is absent. Mr. Romer?
Here.
Mr. Romer is present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. BESE members, members of the audience, I'm chairing this committee meeting just today at the request of Ms. Beebe. Just all fears aside, I will not be chairing future Educator Effectiveness Committee meetings. So let's go ahead and get started.
Madam Chair, we have one item to add to consent, item 3.1, which can be found on page 99. Consideration of the revocation of the Louisiana Ancillary Certificate number 509925 issued to Ms. Ariel Coleman Kirk due to the submission of fraudulent documents. The recommendation is to revoke.
Okay. So that item has been moved to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to accept the recommendation?
I'll second.
By Ms. Beebe. I have a second by Mr. Gillo. Any discussion? Any objection to the motion on the floor? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 2.1 on page 1. Consideration of policy revisions to Bulletin 130, Regulations for the Evaluation and Assessment of School Personnel, Section 325, Extenuating Circumstances, regarding the invalidation of teacher evaluations due to extenuating circumstances. The department recommendation is to approve the department recommendation, the proposed language by the department.
Okay, we'll hear from the superintendent on this item, and then I have two public comment cards. Board members, it's up to you whether you.
I can wait and make a motion after.
Okay, then we'll hear from the superintendent, hear public comments, and then we'll move to the board members. Thank you.
Thank you, members. And I might ask if Ms. Bendeley, I might ask you to come up and just give me a quick bit of assistance here, as I know Ms. Bendeley has drafted some of the guidance, and I don't see her. Sorry, Ms. Devlin. We are going to ask the board to approve revisions submitted by the department with the exception of the language contained in provision E. At the October meeting, the board asked the department to examine the section of Bulletin 130 that was pertaining to the invalidation of value-added data for extenuating circumstances. At the time, Ms. Hill offered language that you will see in your packet. And we have reviewed that language and spoken with stakeholders, most recently at the Superintendent's Advisory Council. And the department does agree that, per the original conversation that Ms. Hill raised, there are changes that need to be made to this section of the bulletin. The department, we think it's important to have consistent standards regarding any time when data are invalidated, and thus our most significant issue with the suggestion raised by Ms. Hill is that it allows for a local decision regarding what is a result or a standard. It's a statewide standard, and it allows for any local superintendent to say, well, we are invalidating this statewide standard or this statewide result. We are proposing to keep, as is currently in the language, therefore, a 60-day excused absence invalidation for extenuating circumstances that result of absences that are fewer than 60 days. The local superintendents or CEOs of charter organizations may apply to the state superintendent. The state superintendent may grant or not grant that application. And so the real distinction between what she had proposed and what we are coming back now after having been in multiple conversations with teachers about this, with superintendents and others, is that here you would have a situation where rather than the local superintendent getting to decide on their own terms whether to invalidate, the local superintendent would come to the state superintendent. We also, the other distinction is that she and Ms. Hill in her language had proposed what would ultimately be 40 days, and we are maintaining 60 days. But as we said before, we are allowing for there being exceptions in the case, for example, that somebody is significantly ill, but it didn't total up to 60 days because maybe it was the end of the school year. We're allowing the state superintendent discretion on that, and thus you have our recommendation. I know that given what I started with, it probably requires an amendment that the board approve the revisions submitted by the department with the exception of the language contained in provision E. But I hope that this explains our rationale.
So you want to remove E? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, if we want to accept language or remove the language contained in provision E.
So is there a motion at this point, the meeting?
I have I'm sorry, wait for a motion.
I'd like to get a motion on the floor.
I'll move for approval as presented, removing item E.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Romer. Is there a second to the motion? By Ms. Bofi, thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Garvey and then go from there.
Yes. Is that item E that's on page 3?
Item E that is on page 3, I can explain why it is that we have determined to remove that language. We, after having significant discussions with advocates and with teachers across the state, have determined that the concerns that have been raised by some are right, that there are changes that should be made with respect to those students who are at the highest end of the LEAP or iLEAP scales. However, the solution of there being a different way of evaluating the teachers of those students is not the appropriate way to go. Instead, that the board will implement, the department will implement in the formula a consideration of the targets that are set for the students that score at the very highest levels, and that rather than setting a target for a student that is at the top end of the spectrum, again at the top end of the spectrum, instead there will be a slightly more room to grow in the model for students that are at the very highest level. That already is in the formula. We would be extending it to not just students that score a perfect 500, but students that score in that vicinity at the advanced level. But we think that that's a more appropriate solution because rather than carving off a specific set of teachers, you're addressing any teacher who teaches a child who is scoring at the advanced level. And you're essentially setting an expectation that you are going to have to continue to keep that kid scoring high, but you're not creating a tiny margin of error where if this child gets a couple of questions wrong, you precipitously drop. Doing that in the formula is a more appropriate way of doing it than exempting any teacher from the evaluation system altogether.
Okay, I got a follow-up question, but this is on page 2. Under section C, it talks about petitioning the superintendent, and I'm guessing this is what you were talking about a minute ago. It said I'm seeing questions from the chairman. Section C, when other extenuating circumstances justify the invalidation of a teacher or administrator for evaluation, he or she may petition the superintendent.
Mr. Garvey, that's not the recommendation. That's not that doesn't speak to the motion on the floor. The motion on the floor.
That was Ms. Hill's
That's Mrs.
language.
Hill's. That
I
is
thought
not.
the motion on the floor was to accept this item as recommended.
No, it
Other
would
than
be
to
item
remove-
3. If you look at item 3, that's the one with
Page 3.
page 3,
Okay.
but with omitting item E.
Okay, so
That's the motion.
we are not going to approve the changes that are outlined on page 2?
No, that's not the motion on the floor at this point.
The motion is just to do page 3.
Page 3 with Mr. Romer's motion is to approve the recommendation made by the department on page 3, excluding item E.
Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Lee.
Mr. Superintendent, I'm assuming by identifying this extenuating circumstances that you have reviewed where we've had some problems and you feel like this does address it.
We do. Just to give you an example, there are circumstances that resulted of Isaac where you didn't have a student who was out for the entirety of 60 days, or a teacher who was out for the entirety of 60 days, but they missed the first month and a half of school. That's a significant circumstance, takes a while to bounce back from that, no matter when you are in class, and some discretion here would be appropriate. On the other hand, we think that granting that discretion to anyone to determine is probably not a smart idea.
I was thinking primarily about item E, where students are at the highest level.
Yeah.
You reviewed those situations, and
We did. We've done quite a lot of look at the teachers in that ballpark, and I think what we've realized is that teachers teach a plurality of students. There really are very few that have, say, just everybody at the advanced level, almost none. And at the same time, it's fair to say that if you are keeping your kids at the advanced level, you're doing something right. So rather than saying, well, you got a 490 on the LEAP last year, we're going to expect you to get a 495 next year, thus the margin of error is quite small. We're going to say, let's set the target at a reasonable level. Let's not set it at a level where the margin of error is so tight that if you make a mistake, you drop precipitously. And that will allow for teachers a more fair system for teachers whose kids are at the highest levels and are close to the 500 mark.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll go to public comment. Ms. Bothy.
So I know my understanding of the formula is that you have both an individual like you look at individual students, but then you also look at class dynamics. So what you're proposing is to give a larger margin for individual students who are scoring at the high end. We're not talking about a class dynamic issue. We're talking about individual students. So that if that's the case, then this would this will, I guess, impact to some degree all teachers who have students at the very high end, or all students who are at the very high end.
Yes, and to make a couple of things clear, first, this is not an item for board approval.
Right.
Yeah, so this is not a board policy question. So we're not asking you to approve that. We're giving you context for why we don't think that the solution here, E, is appropriate.
Right.
But yes, effectively, you could be a teacher who has all of your kids at basic except one student at advanced.
Right.
And this would take that into account. It's a matter of where the targets are set for students who are at advanced, which is a very small percentage of our students.
And it's something that's already part of a formula. It's just a tweak that you'll be able to make within the formula.
Yes,
Okay.
there already is that system for kids who are at the very highest levels. We're just extending it to a somewhat larger number of kids.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lee.
I know, Superintendent, you are aware that South Highlands in Caddo is a high-performing school, has been, is consistent with that, and yet some of their better teachers were not in the effective range. But this should take care of that, shouldn't it?
Yes, and I want to say that about that school and about any school, any teacher in the state, the reasons for why teachers end up as high-performing or low-performing are complex, and I think that we need to, and certainly, I learn about this more every day, but when you look at the data and you go student by student, it really is quite an education, because what you see is that while the aggregate numbers as a teacher may be quite good, there may be a set of kids who are dropping so precipitously that though you don't see them in the aggregate, actually it's a significant problem. So I think there's a lot of reasons for why people don't do well or do well on the numbers that are complex. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that you don't want to punish someone whose kids got an A++, and then next year they got an A+, and you're saying that's a precipitous drop. So by measuring the kid rather than tagging it to the teacher, you don't create a special class of teachers so much as you say, let's recognize the specific needs of this student, which we already do to some extent. We're just extending this somewhat.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and Michael Falk is Miss. Oh, Miss Beebe, did you want a question? I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
So, Mr. Superintendent White, you're saying that you are tweaking the formula, or you're saying that the existing formula will address these concerns, and that's the reason for removal of item E?
I am saying that our plan is to make a slight adjustment to the formula. But I would say that it's also important to know that the formula in somewhat adjusts every year. And the reason the formula essentially reacts to the results that the test get. So this is an adjustment. And it's actually an adjustment that already exists. It's just being slightly increased.
And you know, we're often referencing the high-performing students and the concerns we have, but also having taught students with disabilities, knowing that they do regress, I think they're left out of the equation. What are we doing to address that population or taking into consideration those concerns? Because
well,
there is.
and this is why I'm a little. The ordering of these items really is not right for what it should be ideally, because we should be talking about this in the context of the larger changes to Compass. But I think that these questions are pretty easily answered when you unpack every teacher's numbers. And you know, I'll tell you on the other side of this, and you'll see in a second some of the other changes we're proposing to Compass, is a proposal to lay out every piece of data possible for teachers. And one of our plans is to, as many teachers have requested, give a target toward the beginning of the year so that teachers know what target they're being held accountable to hitting. But for some of our students who are harder to move, harder to make progress with, that's a bit of a difficult situation for us, because the data show actually the target is pretty small. So I guess in answer to your question, to be fair to teachers, the target for a lot of students with disabilities is quite a low level of progress. And that's how the system accommodates it, to be fair. That's regrettable at the same time, and we're going to have to find a way to communicate in a way that doesn't institutionalize low expectations.
Okay. Superintendent Falk, is he still with us? No. Okay. Then our other speaker on this item is Wayne Free.
Wayne Free, Louisiana Association of Educators. I'm not sure exactly how to approach this based upon the discussion that's going on, so I'll just do my very best to keep it clear and direct. I've spoken to you many times over the last several years, particularly the last 3 years, about the weaknesses of the evaluation system in Act 54 as you currently designed it. The section that the superintendent just was talking about would make it better for some people and worse for others. It doesn't deal with the particular process that is critical to what's going on. And I understand, particularly with the last 2 reports that just came out, one that came out last week from Gates Foundation, the MET report, and another report that came back in December, Practical Assessment, Research and Evaluation, Evaluating Teacher Schools Using the Student Growth Model. Both of those major reports said what we've said for some time, that the Act 54 as currently used in Louisiana is totally ineffective, at least as a fair evaluation of classroom performance in the tested grades and subjects. And that's not just them. There are other reports that say the same thing. For example, George Knoll told you in his report that the stability validity issue on those particular area was at least 60% for the top 20% and a little bit higher validity error, stability validity error at the other one. And the department's data, which was provided to in October, reinforced that data. It had not improved. The MET report and the other report directly in this process indicate there are 4 major areas of concern that we have not dealt with in this state. The first is the high stakes process, 50% or greater. The MET report suggests 30%. A third, 35% is where you really ought to be. The same for other kinds of assessments from principals and other individuals, and they suggest some other stuff. The second, and that's critical to what you're discussing now in terms of removing from this process, is student placement. The issue in each and every study indicates that student placement affects the stability, validity of the process extremely. And in Louisiana, student placement is all we do. You're either placed by your magnet position, or you're placed by your poverty, race, or other kinds of things in this state. It is not a choice the district makes. It is a process that goes on within it. The other two factors which are critical, the first is the decision made in a one-year basis rather than a 2 or a 3-year basis in Compass. Now, having said all of that, it doesn't deal with the short pieces we're looking at. It deals with the long-term weakness.
Mr. Free, are you going to speak to the
Yes, ma'am.
recommendation
Just
for
as
us?
quickly as I can.
Because I've already extended time. I will continue. I'll give you some more time to give us your position on this recommendation.
Right. There are two recommendations I'd make. And the first one is that you need to appoint a committee to study the new reports that are coming out. They are consistent with what we've had for the last 10 years. And I'll be happy to serve as the chair of that committee, or you can appoint anybody you want to serve as the chair of that committee, but I would strongly recommend that the chair of that committee be removed from the department, because I do not believe the department is capable of doing that process based on the political needs of the department. The second one is Ms. Hill's recommendation that you have a process included in the short-term piece of this particular piece for removal back to the superintendent and back to this board is a good policy that needs to be included at some point in time in the overall discussion. The removal of E from this particular piece doesn't solve the short-term issues of what's going to occur. It's just a political issue, and I understand that. But something needs to be done before the legislature comes back. Because if Act 54 is not modified in a way that provides a more fair and evaluation system, as I told you before, it will come back to bite you, and you will be doing this over and over
Thank you,
again.
Mr. Free. I hope you stay around for the next item. Thank you. There are no further comments. There is a proper motion and second on the floor. Any further discussion?
I don't know if I should delay into the next item, but just to piggyback the concerns communicated by Mr. Free as a personnel director, and of course it was recently reported in a newspaper, the mass exodus of educators, and I'm saying educators because we're not only talking about teachers, we're talking about assistant principals and principals, and there is serious concern, and if we don't take some kind of action soon, we won't have individuals who are qualified, certified within our traditional schools to teach our students. And that's why I said earlier, I feel like we've been given a lethal injection and we're being set up for failure, because I predicted from day one with the flaws within this Compass evaluation process, our teachers, I mean, there are so many stressors out there. And so they're just, those who are retirement eligible, they're just leaving. And so what does that leave? So are we here, do we want to pride ourselves in saying we have the most effective teacher evaluation process, or do we want a process that we can embrace and continue to offer support and assistance to our educators so that we will have individuals to remain in those classrooms to provide quality instruction to our students? I mean, I think this is a travesty. I say it repeatedly. What is our mission? What is our ultimate
Okay,
goal?
Ms. Beebe, I'm going to, like Ms. Bopey called me down earlier today, I'm going to ask you to stay, keep your comments to the motion on the floor. If there is an area that you want to study, you want the board to look at, you want teacher attrition, then I may suggest that you do it today, or maybe you work with BESE staff and bring a receive and refer tomorrow.
Well, I think just to piggyback, and Mr. Free made a statement that he thinks that we should be responsible on this board to study, to get the committee in place, to study the results and also to look at the implications moving forward. You're going to see greater teacher attrition, principal attrition. I mean, is this what we want? Because we're going to be here governing a system with unqualified people. And I know some of you, your philosophy, it's often said we have philosophical differences. I will acknowledge this. But at the same time, we will be governing classrooms or educators or a systems with non-qualified personnel. That's where we have it.
Thank you, Ms. Beebe. Okay, there's a proper motion and second on the floor. I don't have a card from you. No, let me check, because I don't want to deprive you of your moment. You asked to speak to item 2.2. We are currently on 2.1. I don't have a card from you. Would you like to speak? I would like you, please come to the table. I don't believe you, but okay.
And I apologize because I thought I had two cards.
No.
Just very, very quickly, the two policies are completely different. The first policy is, and I do agree with the superintendent in the ordering of this subject, I wish it would be a little different. Because the first policy, the origin from our perspective as a stakeholder in the process, was to empower teachers to appeal to the superintendent. The superintendent doesn't have to grant anything, and that's what the language did. The language gave a method by which the teacher could bring to the attention what they felt was a flawed process. The addition of E would really I would respectfully recommend that should be part of the overall changes or recommendations to the process, a part of Bulletin 130, when we start talking about the exceptions at the higher achieving students. I think it confuses it, and the final comment, just to make it very clear, this policy does not address the whole issue of providing teachers with the kind of empowerment that we discuss often, an ability to interface with power directly and say, look, I don't feel I was treated fairly, Mr. Superintendent, would you please entertain this? The superintendent has a right to say no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monahan. There's the superintendent like to respond?
No, I somewhat agree with what you said, Steve, because the Act 54 currently says that local districts have to have a policy, a process for that kind of appeals. And so I'm agreeing with you that I don't think every district's policy is clear to every teacher at present. And we need to work on that.
Okay. We've heard from our speakers. We have a proper motion and second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item. Thank you.
Your next
Would you like to stay at the table?
Your next item is item 2.2. This is found on page 4. Consideration of policy revisions to Bulletin 130, regulations for the evaluation and assessment of school personnel regarding revisions to the COMPASS evaluation system. The recommendation is to approve.
Okay, BESE members, we have quite a few comment cards. The superintendent will introduce this item. If it's agreeable, we'll get a motion on the floor. We'll listen to some comments and then take action. Thank you.
And to staff, I thought we have a deck, right? And we're going to walk through. Okay.
So moved.
Okay.
Staff, Steve, did you ask for a motion?
I'll take a motion now. Yes, ma'am.
I'm moving approval.
Okay. A motion by Ms. Bradford to approve the recommendation as presented. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Bofi. So we have that piece of business is dealt with. While we wait for a PowerPoint.
Well, why don't we begin walking through?
Do we have hard copies?
Board members have hard copies in their packets. So why don't we begin? There we go.
No, we actually don't have the packets. No, we don't have hard copies. Yeah.
Well, it's on your screen. It's on your screens then. Sorry about that.
Ann is passing out hard copies if you want something to take home.
Members, I'm going to walk through changes. I think it's important to note that the changes that are actually policy for the board to pass here are relatively small, and you obviously see those in your backup. The presentation encompasses a whole host of changes, I think some of which were spoken to by Mr. Monahan. Thank you.
I have, yeah.
So why don't we start paging through? I'm going to ask Hannah Deach, who has done great work to make these changes happen for us, page through this, and I will just talk about it briefly. The first slide just reiterates, and I'm going to be very brief, that Compass really should be a guide that, as some of the comments alluded to, while you may have high-end and low-end teachers, the fact of it is most of our teachers are in the middle. We need to help them, we need to support them, and Compass really should be a guide to helping them help their students. And so we view Compass as simply a tool that helps teachers achieve the Common Core standards. The rubric is there to help teachers deliver instruction that achieves the Common Core. The goal-setting process is there to help teachers plan and quantify student achievement in line with the Common Core. We have, at the same time, we need to acknowledge that the system before did not accomplish this. It was a system that did not give teachers the feedback that they needed. And I know there have been several iterations of evaluation plans in Louisiana. But in the year that Act 54 was passed, more than 98% of teachers received the same rating of satisfactory, not really providing teachers the feedback that they need in order to improve to the level that we're describing. Compass, as laid out in Act 54, establishes two sources of information: a student growth component, which can either be the value-added data or the student learning target, and a professional practice component, where teachers are observed in the classroom and given feedback on a set of descriptors of classroom practice. And it's been in development since 2010, when a committee of union officials, educators, policymakers, convened by a rule of the legislature, developed the Compass system. Every district was given a chance to pilot it in 2011. 10 districts chose to do so. They piloted it. Adjustments were made in 2012. And ultimately, this year was its first year of implementation statewide. We are here to propose a set of changes based on comment that we've received after hundreds of training sessions, meetings, town halls, online virtual town halls as well, most of them coming from teachers and principals. In that year, 6,000 evaluators have been trained, 75,000 goals have been set, more than 10,000 observations have been logged in our system, and overall, these numbers represent tremendous success. And we're not all the way there to making it the professional development tool that we want it to be. Teachers have given us good feedback in terms of how we can get there. And so the presentation that we want to walk through and brief with you is about how we make Compass the best professional development tool it can be. The feedback that we've received is really in three areas, and I'm going to walk through this slide quickly. One, teachers want clarity at the beginning of the year as to how well their students are doing and are expected to do. Two, over the course of the year, teachers want clarity as to what is expected of their classroom practice and more feedback. And three, toward the end of the year, teachers want clarity in terms of how the rating was arrived and transparency in terms of how the rating was arrived at. They also want to know that the ratings are as consistent as they can possibly be from one school to the next and across districts, from one district to the next. I'm going to describe on each of the next slides, thus, the individual changes that we're proposing to make. I will call out those areas that require regulatory change in the bulletin. The first area is clarity in terms of setting goals. We are committed to providing every teacher with a rich data set of student past performance and history on which to base goal setting. And second, in light of teacher feedback, we're going to provide all value-added teachers with an estimated target, to Ms. Beebe's question before. So rather than teachers being essentially judged on a target at the end of the year, they're given a target at the beginning of the year that gives them a good goalpost in terms of what they're striving to hit. You see on the next slide a sample of what such a report might look like. It would list students, their estimated expected score, and then it would provide a large number of fields to explain why this is the score that was expected of the student. Over the course of the year, students are observed on a rubric. Teachers are. And teachers have said to us that using that set of descriptors, they'd like greater clarity. They'd like greater clarity in understanding what at my grade level in my subject area does this behavior you're describing actually look like. So we have committed to developing a library of instructional videos that will be able to show from kindergarten through high school in math and English language arts each element of the rubric in video. If I want to see what a high-performing English language arts 6th grade teacher looks like in questioning, I can go and see that in video. Second, we'll be providing more explicit description as to how the rubric applies to teachers with severely impaired special education students and with students who are early primary grades. We will use these tools in ongoing training of educators statewide. Jim?
Are we taking questions along the way, or?
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's my decision, but yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to back off.
I'm just messing with you.
You talk about the rubric. You talking about the rubric that was suggested by the department?
Yeah.
As an example, aren't the LEAs allowed to develop their own rubric?
They are allowed to develop their own rubric and to apply to the state for those rubrics. One of the advantages of using the Danielson rubric is that it is a national model, and thus it comes with kind of aggregated national resources. Now, I would also add that in districts like DeSoto, we continue to use the TAP rubric. The TAP rubric also comes with national resources if you participate in the TAP program.
Okay. How many districts have gone with the Danielson? You know, roughly?
It's about 80%.
80?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions at this point?
Yes.
Ms. Yes, Ms. Beebe.
I'm glad you raised that question, Mr. Borby, because initially, as one of the pilot districts, St. Martin Parish, piloted Dr. Strong's rubric. However, and of course, like I said, we were one of 9 districts. I think on the website, I think it lists 22 or 20 districts. The concern was just when we, after completing the four months of piloting, at the beginning of this year, we went directly to Danielson's rubric, and there was a news article in which she expressed great concern that Louisiana would take her rubric and utilize it piecemeal, because once again, there's a question of validity and reliability, and that is the concern for most educators, and I'm speaking on behalf of educators. So I think this, we're not against evaluations within the education arena, but we're concerned, and that's just one small concern. There are numerous concerns, but I think that's one that we need to look at or to consider very closely, as Mr. Freed pointed out. We need some kind of committee, look at the results. We're talking about people's livelihood tagged to this instrument that we know the author has indicated she has some serious concerns. Moving forward, possible litigation, we're going to have some real experience out there to say, and many. I'm getting phone calls all the time. I'm getting requests for retirements, resignations, and it's not just St. Martin Parish, it's throughout the state. So as we progress, that's just one concern, and I'm glad you brought that component up.
Okay.
Just to give you a sense of that, clearly Ms. Danielson and we disagree on this, but the feedback from the pilot was that 11 categories was too much on the rubric. She was suggesting 21. So I don't know how well received using all 21 would be by the principals and teachers, but I take your point. I've read her criticisms.
Okay, will you continue?
Yes. In terms of continued feedback, the proposals, and this is in your in the bulletin, establish greater flexibility for principals by allowing for reducing or eliminating the distinction between formal and informal observations. There is still one announced observation that's required, but this will allow principals to be able to see teachers multiple times without having to adhere to the kind of protocol around a formal observation and gather more information. At the same time, we want principals to be able to focus on struggling teachers more than they're focused on their highly effective teachers. Thus, teachers labeled highly effective with the data. With those teachers, principals will only have to observe them once, provided that they are focusing on struggling teachers in the use of that time. On the next slide, we have heard from a lot of teachers in the middle of the value-added spectrum that they don't fully understand what this means, that to be a 2 or a 3 on the value-added spectrum doesn't really mean much. It's not highly effective, it's not ineffective, and that principals are kind of saying, well, here's what the state said you were. They're not getting feedback. And we have proposed in this that in the middle, and if we could move to that slide showing the middle, Hannah, that principals be able to exercise a small amount of discretion for teachers that are used by way of using their student learning targets. Meaning that a principal might say, well, you're at a 2, I'm confirming you're at a 2 because I see that in your student learning targets. You're at a 3, I see that your student learning targets really struggled and we're going to drop you down to a 2. The reason for having this is within a safe area of effectiveness, it creates a conversation where otherwise there is not one. It creates the need for more feedback, the principal having to take a stand on how well the student results actually serve the child, rather than simply saying, well, the state came up with this score. We've included in the deck details on how that process may happen. I'm not sensing an overwhelming amount of energy on that one. At the end of the year, the teachers have said that they want greater clarity on the specific score and how the score was computed. Thus, the department has proposed to give every teacher a detailed report for what the expected score of the student was, what the actual score is, what the difference is, and thus what percentile band does that place teachers in. That should give teachers greater clarity, but should also allow for principals to say, okay, if you're in that band, I understand, you're either highly effective, you're ineffective, or you're in the middle. And in the middle, again, they would have to say, and I'm going to verify where you are in the middle so that I can give you more feedback on your student work. And you'll see the next slide is a sample end-of-year report to provide greater clarity for teachers on how their score actually was constructed.
Could you just tell me what additional data this report contains?
It'll contain past test scores, this year's projected test score, this year's actual test score, and then all of the student factors that went into the projected score. So
and teachers can log on and get their reports,
yes.
or do you have to wait for their principal to sit down?
No, they'll be able to log on and get their report in the system,
Okay.
in the information system.
And if they have questions about it, or?
If they have questions, we have a email address that they can write in, and if the questions cannot be answered at their school site.
Ms. Beebe.
I know we're discussing value added here, but those, I think it's the 63.
SLTs?
Yeah, the SLTs. My concern as a personnel director, and that's one of my responsibilities within the district, it's because of the short turnaround time for training, and for years we've written student objectives. But using assessments to establish the baseline, I've noted that some of my teachers have been overzealous with the SLT, and some maybe have less rigor. And I'm concerned if this is happening within my district, and of course we've had the conversations with principals and teachers, and they've had their meetings, but once again, looking or noting that, I mean, this was so rushed, I want to say that I think everyone made a good gesture at trying to be responsible and trying to establish those effective SLTs, but then moving moving forward with, a comparison across districts, I just think we're going to have great inconsistencies because of the lack of training.
Yeah.
And I fear that some will have some SLPs that that established too high. And so moving forward, what is the response to that? If we see, how will we respond if we have a significant number of failures? Will we regroup and say, well, maybe we did a poor job of training, or maybe we rushed? And I think that's what Mr. Freed alluded to. I don't want to speak for him, but I mean, so what can we anticipate as we move forward to get the results? What if we have a bleak picture? What if the results are such that we
Well, I
cannot
guess,
do well?
yes. Well, I guess what I would hope is that the picture is real. In other words, that the evaluations reflect the reality for the students. And I think what you wouldn't want to get in a situation, Ms. Beebe, let me make sure I understand you, is if the students did very well, but on the other hand, the results, the teachers, just didn't set their goals right, and their evaluations were unfairly low. Or maybe the reverse, the students didn't learn anything, but all the teachers, got rated also so high. In the end, really the whole system puts its faith in the managers. I do want to say that. I think there is an impression by some that there can be any expectation this is a purely scientific evaluation system. It isn't. It's a tool for managers. As such, our plan, I'm going to talk about on the last slide, is to, over the course of the year between now and the middle of the summer, give principals and superintendents and their senior staffs information that shows comparisons between how are the observations and the students' results comparing, and then also how are the overall ratings and the students' results comparing, so that at a school level or at a district level, releasing no individual teacher information, of course, the district and the school can understand, okay, this is how accurate and rigorous the ratings were, and if they need to course correct, they're going to have, in terms of level setting their expectations, they're going to have time to do so. Meaning that if you can see in March that in your district 95% of your ratings are at a 3 or more, but actually there is some indication that student achievement in your district is not progressing that highly, that's important information for you to see, and the reverse, or the opposite. We then would give superintendents and principals a kind of initial rating so they can see, okay, here are what my initial ratings are, here are what my student results are in the late spring, so that they can say, okay, are we sure that these are the most rigorous ratings? And then when they go out with their final ratings, then they'll know that they are as rigorous as they should be, having seen all of that information.
Okay, but, I mean, you answered, but I'm seeing, within my review, and just in general terms, that I'm seeing more in the effective range, which that's acceptable. But then, I don't know, again, the student performance, if we're going to see the results that we want to see, and that's a concern. I mean, it's just like we're going to be an experiment, and I think that's the fear among educators. That's the fear among educators is that, they're afraid of losing their jobs, or, I mean, they're working really hard, and that's why some have chosen, like, look, we're doing the best we can, we're trying to make the changes, we have embraced the changes, we're doing what we can, but moving forward, we may not be rated effectively, and our educators take this to heart. They don't want to be rated ineffective, and they would just, I mean, I think I can speak for them, they would just rather leave on a high note than to get an ineffective rating. I believe that with my heart of hearts, and that's why we're seeing a mass exodus. It's not that they're lazy or they don't want to impact education. It's just that fear factor. I sat with a principal a couple of months ago, and she has young children. Her husband is self-employed, and she said, Ms. Beebe, I'm afraid. She said, I don't know about my future. And, because, this is all tied to employment. And there's a lot of fear out there. And I think we need to to recognize that fear, and in some way, we need to get to these people to say, you know, we support you, we're going to continue offering support and assistance, and I understand we're tied to legislation, and, you know, following year, they're rated ineffective, you know, they're gone, but, or they lose their penny. And you know, I just feel like we've been in the media, there's been so much publicity regarding the fact that, you know, our public schools are failing, our educators have failed us, and that's so far from the truth, because I know we have some hardworking, exemplary educators out there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no doubt, and this all doesn't work unless they're supported. And, you know, we can talk about that in other elements, but I hope you see that the changes that we're making here are in an attempt to be clear with them so that they don't feel like there's any magic behind the curtain. They understand exactly the terms on which this system is working, to give them clear examples of classroom practice as well as clear targets for assessments. And at the same time, to try to create a process where actually there is a dialogue between principals and teachers. And that's what this is about, knowing that it really, at the end of the day, it is schools and their principals and teacher leaders that make the kinds of things happen that you're describing. Let me just finalize this, just close this out. As I said, we will share reports, and I mentioned this to Ms. Beebe, we will share reports to ensure that there is transparency and rigor in the ratings. And finally, I'll just reiterate, because it's in the slides here, that in unique circumstances, we are going to be communicating with teachers that we will be adopting some of Ms. Hill's recommendations on the 60-day component, and we will be including the idea that a local superintendent may appeal to the state superintendent. We'll also be including an adjustment in the formula around our state's most advanced students. We will be communicating these changes this month. We will be releasing in February a 2013-14 academic strategy, which I will discuss at tomorrow's superintendent's report. That will include guidance on support for assessment, curriculum, teacher collaboration, as well as the COMPASS system. And over the course of the year, we will begin training and webinars this spring on these new changes, as well as the system generally. Thank you for indulging me, and look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Ms. Bofi, would you consider letting us go
Absolutely.
through the public
I'll go.
comments, and then we'll do another round and hopefully take action. We'll start with Mr. Monahan and Mr. Freese, since I asked you to stay up, and then we'll go to Ms. DeSalle and Ms. Abear will be next. And Mr. Monahan, I think you made a really good point about providing information. That is, we'll talk to BESE staff about modifying the comment cards. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging that, because sometimes when one is opposed, they're not all opposed. And
I
when
agree.
it's for, you're not all for, you know?
Let's not waste your minutes talking
Well,
about
you
that.
don't have me on the clock yet, do you?
I do,
Wow.
starting now.
I'm going to bring my sand dial one day when I come here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak once more, and I don't want to waste any of my time or yours, so I'll get right down to the meat of it. I appreciate the fact that the superintendent is trying to address the problems that have been noted to be within the construct of the evaluation system. Unfortunately, and I really do mean this without any sarcasm or ill will, I think it is a severely broken system. It really is. And I think I have the history, and I have had the participation in the process going back to before we adopted Act 54. I've spoken to the sponsor of the bill himself. He noted from the floor the first thing he would do is, if this was not a better and accurate and fair indication of where teachers are, then to be the first to move to repeal or to amend. And I think what we're getting right now in the field, because I'm going to share some data with you, just as the superintendent has, because we've been tracking, that there is no confidence in this instrument right now, and there is a backlash. And there are political consequences that are involved in this. That's not the superintendent's problem, and it's not mine, but it is driving the exodus of good teachers from our classrooms. And I think part of the honest speak when we deal with something like this is to admit and not immediately assume or to cast blame or to suggest that teachers are leaving because they're not willing to to rise to the challenge, because I think they are. They're just tired of the chaos that has come out of a system that wasn't ready for implementation when it was implemented. It was passed in a rush, and now we're standing behind it, and we're working on the fringes or in the margins to try to fix it. So very quickly, let me just simply share this. We put online some time ago the opportunity for teachers to tell their story. We were receiving hundreds of phone calls and contacts in the field about problems. We couldn't answer all the questions either. So we just asked them to tell us. And we're probably reaching close to 1,000 volunteer responses, but people that wrote narratives, not only checked the boxes in. And I'll share with a few of those comments, and then I promise to the superintendents of this board to format this for what it's worth and share with you what teachers are saying and some of the reasons why they're leaving. Often repeated complaint is that they feel that this was done from on high. Without their input, it was once again done to them. One of the reasons why empowering teachers to question the results and to, as professionals, bring forward to this board or to the superintendent first what they see to be problems. Second, they said the system appears to have been devised in a spirit of punish and blame, not, as I heard the superintendent say just moments ago, to make Compass the very best professional development instrument that you possibly can have. That is a very good thing to say, and it is important that that's where the conversation should have begun. But it didn't. There was an assignment of blame, and I promise you, Ms. Dasky, afford me a few minutes.
I will.
Okay? Because I just want to communicate what they have said. They said that still they're not convinced that the plan itself takes into account the external factors that impact education. The issues of poverty and not hiding behind labels, but real issues. The cuts to social services that we're seeing be driven by economics. Mental health, which you hear so much about. Nutrition. All of those things, and I was sitting at the table when I heard conversations saying, we have to carry the student across the goal line, as if the child is a football or some inanimate object, not a participating individual in the process. Comment. I am an ELA teacher scheduled to be evaluated by a first-year instructional coach whose only experience in teaching is teaching high school math. She has not taught as long as me, she does not have more education than me, and she has zero content knowledge about ELA. I have a huge issue being evaluated by someone without the necessary credentials, experience, or education. I think it's a legitimate complaint. And I watched LaTip fail for the same reasons of having individuals not in the field evaluate teachers such as physics teachers and math. And I know time is of essence. I teach, and I'll close. I will skip through all of this. But the bottom line here is, it's not Steve Monahan. It's not the Louisiana Federation of Teachers. It's not the unions. If this fails, it will fail because it is a house of cards. And it did not win the confidence of the individuals that are in the classrooms. And the superintendent's attempt to fix it now is admirable, but it's within the construct of the law. And I close with this, since I said I would not read it all to you. Here's the deal. We're approaching a legislative session, and the lines will once again be drawn that the reformers are over here and the status quo agents over here, and there will be no dialogue, because we must hold the line for an evaluation system that those that are in the field are telling you they don't trust and they don't respect. 2 years wasted in piloting, not your fault, superintendent, but 2 years nonetheless were wasted from 2010 to 2012. Now we're saying we're going to allow some others to creep into highly qualified or highly effective. That doesn't build confidence in the science. And I have heard revisionism in how we sold this. It was scientific, empirical, and it wasn't flawless, but we had a scientific measure, because I read the press releases from around the country and in the pieces in the paper, that Louisiana had gotten it right. All I'm begging this board to do, and that's it, get it right. Get it right, and let's not draw lines in the sand of how we're on opposite sides of an issue. We all want fair, accurate evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monahan. I think you'll see, I hate to make a comment, but you'll see the superintendent and the board and the department working very hard to get it right. And I encourage you and your organization to work side by side. And
I'd like to be invited into the conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Free.
Wayne Free, Louisiana Association of Educators. As a classroom teacher, Kentucky's Outstanding Educator Teacher of the Year, much of Compass was what I did. Pre-tested each and every one of my students, post-tested each and every one of my students, used CTBS, California Test of Basic Skill, as a part of the particular process. There is much of Compass that, with a lot of work, will be an effective way to start evaluating and be involved in the process. It's not ready, and it still isn't ready. Let me tell you some of the areas that specifically need it. First of all, I agree with what is attempted, but there are some weaknesses there that can't be solved because of the quality of ILE. Unless you have item analysis, you have no way to grow. I mean, you can tell me that Sam did better than we expected and Mary did worse, but that doesn't help me at all. And we have no item analysis in this assessment process. It doesn't tell me what part of the mathematics they couldn't do because the assessment we developed in this state doesn't allow that to occur. We've got to get beyond that particular process. It's one of the reasons I recommend to every teacher, tested grades and subjects or not, that they develop a pre-test, post-test that allows them to identify what are the weaknesses of their particular content areas that have to be improved. And that needs to be a part of what we look at. Number two, the MET report that came out last week, after 3 years of effective study looking at evaluators at the classroom level, said there are 3 things that have to occur. Strong training, and unfortunately we've got to retrain many of the people doing the evaluation now, of both the evaluators and those being evaluated. Multiple evaluations by multiple individuals, at least 5, and a process to evaluate the evaluators, whereby those who are doing the evaluating, if someone is not consistent with the other evaluators, then they are moved out of the evaluation process. That would help the system in some ways. Again, it's something that needs to be done. Timing, evaluation, getting off of the 50% because it will not work are parts of the process, and every piece of research reinforces that. And here's the issue again. We're telling superintendents, we're telling boards that they have to have new systems of payment, reduction in force, and everything else based upon Act 54 and Act 1 when we don't even have our act together to get there. We don't have a fair and reliable measure of effective teaching. And we need to go to the legislature saying, postpone this stuff until we get it right, and we will work to get it right. And let me reinforce something Steve said. I'll be happy to come and meet. I've met with all kinds of committees in the last 8 years. I haven't been invited to one in the last 2.
Okay, appreciate that. It's good thing to know. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Free. Next person is Stephanie Tissot, and then Kim Hebert, followed by Cheryl Lott and Sean Fleming. Is Mr. Fleming still here? I don't think he is. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Tissot. I'm with the Council for a Better Louisiana. I've spent a lot of time looking at this system and talking to a great number of people, including people out of state. And I think it would be irresponsible for you as policymakers to not make adjustments as you go along. No system is perfect, and when you're talking about dealing with 50,000 plus people, there's always going to be some issues that need to be improved. So I've looked and talked with a lot of people about these recommendations. There's every indication that you should act on these. They're very thoughtful and reasonable, and in fact, it's desirable. I would add a couple of comments while we can talk about this whole system. It is complex. It's been a lot for our teachers this year. I think one of the issues we continue to hear, and I know that y'all are trying to address this, is the kind of training and help that the evaluators themselves need. It was, a lot to take on, and it's more than it's just new. It's just the scale of it as well. and in addition to the other types of changing. We've all talked about this, Common Core, et cetera, et cetera. This is an area we cannot underestimate in its importance in helping evaluators, principals, and leaders in schools be better at this. Secondly, I would take advantage of this forum to put it on school boards and school districts a little bit. There's so much we can do at the state level, but there's so much we can do at the local level as well. And I hope that school boards and school districts start taking advantage of what we are learning about good teaching and good teachers and letting them guide that in real professional development and assistance. And not only that, start looking at rewarding those educators who are doing a good job. We've lifted the constraint of a state salary scale for teachers. Now we have the opportunity to look at teachers that are doing a good job, to look at master teachers and mentor teachers, people who are going the extra mile, and do something more for them. And I think that's an area that school boards and school districts really need to start taking some responsibility in doing. I think it would help. We can all talk about doing a great job and going beyond, but I think it's also fair to say that they also need to be rewarded and recognized. And that's all I'll say. And I thank you for actually being big people about this and making changes when the changes are warranted. And that's good. That's a good sign.
Thank you
very much.
Ms. Hebert?
Hi, my name is Kim Hebert, and I am a teacher in Terrebonne Parish. I've been teaching for 8 years. I'm also a Stanford Children Educator All-Star. I've worked in both low poverty, high performing, and high poverty, low performing schools over the past 8 years. Similarly, I've had the great opportunity to receive kids in my classroom each year that arrive as low performing, high performing students, and I know the struggles with both of those students. I know the struggles that I face teaching all types of kids. All struggles set aside, I have watched all of my children grow, perform, learn, and succeed over the past 8 years. It hasn't always been easy, but I've seen it. This is why I believe that every single child can learn and that every single child deserves a great teacher who proves themselves effective in helping children grow every year regardless of their background or their previous performance. I'm here to thank you for Compass and for doing the hard work of making the improvements to a very important system in our state. I'm pleased to say for the past 3 years, I have received ratings that have deemed me as a highly effective teacher from the results of my students' gains. Although I may not always maintain that rating, I still believe passionately that as a teacher, I must have high expectations for my students, and I know that the best thing that I can do to support their success is to be a great teacher. With an evaluation system now in place that helps me to get timely feedback about my performance, I'm able to make the adjustments necessary for all of my students to grow. Most importantly, I appreciate that as a state, we are continuing to evaluate and improve the Compass system to make it more effective and fair. I thank you in advance for your ongoing guidance and discretion with this tedious task. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for putting a system in place that seeks improved outcomes for all children.
May I ask
Thank
some
you.
questions of Ms. Hebert?
Absolutely, Ms. Bofi.
Ms. Hebert, congratulations on those ratings. I know that's something that you're proud of, as you should be.
Thank you.
With this information, compared to your administrators, I'm sure that they assumed that you were a good teacher before. Now that they have the data, have they used that? And I don't want names or the school or anything like that, but have they used that information to give you a platform to help teachers who are not in this highly effective range? Have you had that kind of opportunity?
I have had several opportunities to speak with our local superintendent for suggestions, and I know that he is in favor of trying to get funding to have positions available for teachers like myself to help with other other teachers across our parish. So yes, he has called me in for several meetings, not just myself, but a few other teachers that have the same similar ratings. And I do feel like my voice has been heard, and I feel like he has kind of tried to use my knowledge and what I'm doing in my classroom to help, and I think that's the most important part. Not so much on a school level, but on a parish level, which is
Great,
even better.
even better.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, we thank you for being here and for
Thank you.
taking the time to come. Ms. Cheryl Lott? Is Ms. Lott still here? Okay. Mr. Charles Michel. Got that right? Third time's the charm.
I didn't want Ms. Barrios to feel alone, so I figured I'd keep coming up with
Okay.
things all over the world.
You still, Ms. Barrios still wins.
I know. But you know, when you're second, you try harder.
Yes, right.
All right. Good evening again. As you're discussing proposed revisions to the Compass Evaluation Instrument, the Louisiana Association of Special Education Administrators asks that you consider the following as well. In his presentation, Superintendent White indicated that the department would provide greater guidance as to how the rubric applies in primary grades and for teachers of students with significant disabilities. We maintain that more guidance, while certainly helpful, will not mitigate the fact that the instrument is insufficient for certain categories of teachers. While we embrace the added accountability and the specificity of feedback which can result when the instrument is used correctly, when applied to a teacher of students with, for example, significant disabilities, or an adaptive physical education teacher, or a homebound teacher, or an infant teacher, the instrument falls short of its intent. The result of the wholesale application of this instrument is that for some of our teachers, not only do they not get appropriate feedback through which to improve or even to demonstrate their actual level of effectiveness, but it also encourages administrators to manipulate the instrument in order that the results of the observation mirror the actual performance of the teacher and students rather than mirror the effect of the instrument. A few of the examples of the concerns include the questioning component, the engagement component, and the instruction component. Some teachers, by the very nature of their job, will never be able to attain the rating of highly effective, and in some instances never better than ineffective or emerging, because the students with whom they work cannot perform the requisite skills, such as demonstrating that they clearly understand characteristics of quality work. We maintain that while the student may not be able to do this due to identified significant cognitive delays, that doesn't in and of itself make this teacher any less effective than the teacher of the average or above average student whose students are able to demonstrate this. Additionally, a teacher who is working with only one student at a time, infants, adaptive physical education, a program that only has one student enrolled in it, for example, is not afforded the ability of his or her students to initiate suggested grouping changes. Even with multiple students, this may surpass the ability of the students in the class. Many of our students, because of significant cognitive delays, are also unable to initiate the model of learning that takes place. And please know that this has nothing to do with low expectations for students. This is purely on documented ability. In closing, I would like to remind you that Senator Conrad Apple, chairman of the Senate Education Committee, said, "The goal of our legislation was simple. The children of Louisiana deserve the opportunity for the best educational experience possible. This goal will be attainable only through a meaningful partnership with educators and principals." Chairman of House Education and Workforce Committee, Representative Steve Carter, said, "We've said all along that we value teacher feedback and would make any adjustments necessary to the evaluation system to make it as fair and useful as possible." So in the spirit of the intent of the law and of the legislators responsible for passing the law, we ask that you instruct the department to solicit and document input from teachers and administrators currently in the classroom and on the campuses serving these students with unique needs, so that a differentiated assessment tool may be developed. In the absence of such revisions and changes, the result of the inaction on the part of BESE and the department will certainly be a realization that Louisiana believes in some children and Louisiana believes in some teachers. Lucia doesn't believe that this is the message that you want to send to those men and women who work so diligently with children with disabilities, or to the parents of those children with disabilities. And as always, we offer our services to assist in finding members for the task force, and will provide whatever assistance to the department that they need in order to correct this oversight. For all students in Louisiana, Lucia thanks you for your attention to this matter and for prompt action.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of that letter?
I can give you this one.
Okay.
Could you give it to me?
Nancy, I made changes.
Would you like to just email a clean copy to the superintendent?
I can
and
do that.
to,
I actually have his email address.
There you go. Hey, join the club.
We're buds now, you know, we're like this.
I think BESE members would like to have a copy also. That was a good one for you. Yeah.
I just want to say we agree with what you said.
Okay, thank you very much. And then I appreciated the fact that you were willing to listen when we were doing the email correspondence back and forth. The reality of it is such a serious problem. And just this week, in my current position, I've had 2 principals call and say, what do you do with this teacher? Yeah. And what I indicated to you is I don't want to see us manipulate an instrument, because if we do that to make it work for some, I fear that we're going to bastardize the entire program, and I know that's not where we want. We're all about change. We're good with it. We embrace it. But we want to make sure that we do it in a manner that's going to be productive for everybody involved.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was good. Okay, Ms. Barrios, your turn. Let's see, Ms. Lee Barrios, retired educator from St. Tammany Parish. Did I get it right?
You remembered. One of the major problems with Compass is that the teachers do not understand it. And since it involves their livelihood, it's important that they understand it. If I could give you an analogy, it's as if your boss paid you every week, and every week your paycheck fluctuated. And of course, on the week that came up where your paycheck was less, you wanted to know why your paycheck was less. And his response is, well, you get paid on an hourly basis. And that's the explanation. It's a very simple comparison, but it's simple. You want to know, well, how many hours did you count that I worked, and how much are you paying me per hour? Now, the value added metric is very complicated. I've studied it intensely. I couldn't explain it to somebody in depth. I doubt if any of you on this board could, but teachers want to understand that. And they can't understand it unless they're given the information. And this document that Superintendent White presented today is a perfect example of teachers not getting, and the public not getting information. This document was presented to SACS and voted on Tuesday. Dr. Walker Jones and I both went upstairs and asked for a copy of that document after the meeting. I afterwards filed a FOIA to get the document. I still have not been given the document. The Department of Ed has refused to give it to me. But this morning, it was posted on Ed Connect. I still haven't gotten the document. Why am I excluded? Why is everybody excluded who needs to know about this document and to understand it better, excluded from getting this document? That's an infraction of the public information law. Plus, it prevents us from fulfilling our responsibilities of holding you accountable. And that's my question. You need to make sure, no matter what Superintendent White you say, teachers are not being properly informed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have 2 cards, but by Miss Mary Harris and Vicki Lawrence, but I've been advised that Miss Lawrence would like to give her minutes to Miss Harris. Is that correct? Okay, well, come on up. So how about 5 minutes? Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Harris, and I'm principal of South Highland School. And I actually did not plan on speaking today, but I just had some things that I wanted to say. I want to thank you first for everything that you're doing. I believe that Compass is an excellent tool, and I think it's going to raise student achievement, and it's going to help teachers. K through 2nd grade is going to be rated on their SLTs and their principal observations. Other districts are using the TAP model, which is a 3-part model. Our 3rd through 5th grade teachers are being rated on test scores and principal observations, but their test scores are going to trump those principal observations. So in some instances, they are only going to be rated on those test scores. So in my opinion, if you're trying to create a system that is consistent and fair, then this is not it. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for what you're already doing, because I do think we are headed in the right direction, but I do think there needs to be more tweaking to the Compass system. Thank you very much.
And I appreciate you coming down. I know we're trading places now. I came up to see y'all, and now you're down here. What would be the changes you would make?
I would like to see a 3-part model, where principal observation, the test score, and maybe a pre and post test.
Well, that's actually exactly what we just did for 60% of the teachers. And so I don't disagree with you. But I just wanted to make that clear, that on the polls, at the high end, 80% and higher, at the bottom, 20% and below, we're saying we should let the statistical data speak for itself. But in the middle, we're saying let's factor in the pre and post in addition to the value added and the observation for more measures, because you're going to be able to give more definitive feedback in light of that. And look, with respect to what Mr. Free said about the Met study, we're open to that too. I mean, if we get to a point where some of the mechanisms that the Met study said, Wayne, actually could be implemented around student feedback, for example, to add multiple measures, no one is opposed to more measures in the system. I think that, and this is something where it seems like there's generally consensus, and hopefully we'll all be able to work together on it, but I'm in agreement with you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you for coming.
And thanks for coming down.
Board members, that concludes the public comment on this item. There is a motion, a second to approve as notice of intent. Are there any further questions? I'm going to, wait one second. Ms. Bopey and then Ms. Beebe.
I don't have questions, but I just have things that I'd like to say.
Well then, questions or comments?
Okay. To start off with, just going back to the title with making Compass a professional development tool, I think that's exactly where we need to be. And so I'm very excited about, one, the way that we're approaching this work, and then in response to some of the comments that were put forward about teachers' understanding of the system, is that I appreciate the way that the department is planning on revising how results are communicated to teachers, and not just results, but what we anticipate or expect of teachers. And I feel that as we change this communication and we're giving more information to teachers that they access on a personal basis in terms of their students' demographics, that will help them understand the system better. So I think that that you're working there with the communications is very good. Also appreciate the fact that you are responding to the Met report by understanding that the sophistication of any tool between 21 and 79 percentiles is not at the level that we need it to be, and so that you are pulling in another data point. So I do think that is going to make our system stronger. And also the fact that you realize that we have more highly effective teachers in our state than what we've been talking about. So I appreciate this responsiveness and am appreciative of these changes. I see in here that you reference an academic strategy, and I've been fortunate to talk to some of your department members about that academic strategy. My caution with it is not the strategy itself, because I'm very excited about all of the potential that it has, is that the way that you approach it, because I know that the educators are not interested in one more thing that the department is doing to them, but that you really approach it from the support mechanisms that I see it as support mechanisms, and so you title it that way. Because I think that the way that we communicate with people about these things has a influence on the way that people will use them. So I just appreciate you guys taking that into consideration as you continue to develop these tools.
Is that all, Ms. Bopey?
There's probably tons more, but I'm really tired.
Okay, and we have another committee after this one. Ms. Beebe.
Okay, and then I talked to Ann about a point of personal privilege. I did receive an email from a constituent who could not be here today, so I'd like to read her statement.
Actually, Ms. Beebe, if it's acceptable to you, we'll just enter it into the record. But if you'd like to read it, it's your request.
I do have a few additional concerns.
Cover it all.
Okay. This is Erin Pizarro. She's from Caddo Parish, and she's been quoted in several newspapers. But she starts off by saying a Korean proverb states, power lasts 10 years, influence not more than 100. My favorite English teacher somehow influenced me to become what I am today, an English teacher. I can't tell you exactly how she did it, but her influence is with me daily, even 20 years later. Was there a favorite teacher of yours that you think of often? Is there an assessment that can measure that teacher's influence on your life? The new Compass Teacher Assessment wants to measure teacher influence on students' test scores each year. Now that's almost laughable, isn't it, when compared to my English teacher's example. Furthermore, the new Compass Assessment has many flaws, one of which is assessing good teachers as ineffective and bad teachers as effective. I hope that you take this into consideration when you vote on amendments to the Compass assessment today. When my best students fail my test and my worst students excel on the same test, that makes me take pause. When students and parents scream that my test was as fair or reliable or accurate, I realize that there is something wrong with my test, not my students, not me, the teacher, but the test. I do not decide to negate the test for my best and brightest and count it for the worst. I do not white out parts of the test or simply reword some questions. I do not create some ambiguous explanation to trick parents and students into thinking my test is fine. I throw the test out and chalk my mistake up to experience. But the superintendent wants to do all of this to the Compass assessment, and rather than examining the test and recreating it, he's putting a tiny patch on the back of a pair of pants when the entire bottom is falling out. Long ago, my father told me not to vote for amendments to the state constitution. He espoused that legislatures should rewrite the Constitution instead. Even though the Constitution had been rewritten 11 times, my conservative father advocated that the state quit amending what was broken and write something more appropriate. Rather than amending an assessment that is obviously flawed, as seen by the state pilots and research nationwide, why not recreate the entire instrument? If the goal of Race to the Top is to get more students to graduate from high school, why not look at states that are closing the achievement gap like New Jersey and Massachusetts? Why not try to replicate proven teacher assessments like the one in Singapore and Finland? Why introduce an assessment that is flawed and that is making many teachers resign and retire early while discouraging the rest? While I only influence a few students' lives in Caddo Parish, you influence lives throughout the state with your decisions about education. That's quite a sphere of influence. Before you make a decision today, think on this quote by Benjamin Franklin. Beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship. Can you honestly say that this is the best decision to influence public education in Louisiana? And this was submitted by Aaron Pizarro, Caddo Parish. Now, moving on with some of the comments made, I do want to point out that, you know, there is fear out there among our educators, and we have an opportunity to address the fear. Also, when we look at the number of resignations, retirements statewide, when we introduced Compass, in fact, June of this year, well actually 2012, the experience for resignations was 50. There were
Was
25,
50.
We had 50 resignations, 25 retirements, for a total of 75. To date, we have approximately 18 resignations. I spoke to a principal this weekend. At her school, she had 4 individuals who requested medical leave. And this is what we're having. Some may not be exiting, but I'd like to see the experience statewide with the request for medical leave. Also, you know, we've read the research. The research is out there concerning the value-added model, and I am going to put it on the table. I'm going to offer a motion or substitute, because I think we have a motion on the floor, that we form a task force or a task force committee or some type of committee to hear the responses from the educators. I know, Superintendent White, with all due respect, you say you're talking to educators, you've compiled these responses, but I also speak to educators on a daily basis, not only in St. Martin Parish, but statewide. I receive numerous emails. Again, repeating what I said, there's fear regarding this instrument. These people are not opposed to evaluation. They're not opposed so much to Compass. If it were, they just don't have that faith that it is a viable instrument.
Ms. Beebe, I'm not clear. I'm trying to plan for what you're saying. Are you suggesting that you're getting ready to make a substitute motion? Or do you want us to dispense with this motion, and then you may have some other proposal that you want to bring forward?
I would like to propose that we've heard the discussions today from the stakeholders. Let's have a committee. I would challenge any one of you to second the motion whereby we would get a committee together to be proactive when we, the legislature will convene shortly, and then we could bring these concerns to them. I mean, Act 54 is law, I recognize that, but maybe they will hear us. The representative, is it Hoffman? Isn't he the author of Act 54?
Frank Hoffman?
Senator or representative, but it's Hoffman. That maybe we could revisit Act 54 to say, okay, we understand that we need to have an evaluation system in place, and I think he even acknowledged publicly that if he gets the concerns, that maybe he would revisit Act 54.
Ms. Beebe, may I just suggest that in the creation of a task force or a council or commission, take some thought around what the mission will be, what the composition will be, what the charge will be, who will facilitate the meetings, who will be on it. May I just suggest that you maybe brainstorm with our staff and maybe whoever else you want to brainstorm with, and then come back with some proposal to the board. Because if you just throw out that you want a task force,
well, the focus would be on Compass moving forward. I can just speak to one experience that I'm having with HCIS, the computer component. We were advised by the department that if we purchase Observation 360, which is certainly an effective instrument. It gives our teachers, when we go into the classrooms with our iPads, and we conduct the evaluations, the observations, we get immediate feedback. But when you go to the Department of Ed website to check St. Martin's performance, it's like we're non-compliance with policy. But actually, we are doing our job. We're in the classrooms, but yet it's not reflected on the website because we're non-compatible with HCIS. When we purchased Observation 360, we were told not a problem. That's gonna.
Okay. That sounds like something technical that you can sit down with staff, department staff on.
But it's real, Ms. Daphne.
I'm not denying it's real. I'm just trying to.
These are some of the issues we're having within our district, and we're distracted.
You have a perfect venue to be able to address these concerns with the superintendent and the department. You of all people, I mean, can't.
I understand, but I'm saying to you, and I'm saying to Superintendent Price, we could make this right. We have an opportunity to make it right, to get stakeholder buy-in, support, but with the fear, with the lack of trust, it is not going to happen. And I just cited my personal experience in St. Martin Parish with the excellence of teachers. Now, if we're going to be happy about all of these teachers leaving, if that's the ultimate goal, then we can say we've achieved our goal.
Thank you, Ms. Beebe. Ms. Jones? Okay, we have a motion to call the question. Anyone opposed to calling the question? Hearing none, there's a proper motion and second on the floor to approve as notices of intent. Is there any opposition to the motion? Ms. Beebe opposes. Any other nay votes? Hearing none, motion carries. That will be recorded. Next item.
Your next item is item 2.3 on page 10. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel, to reflect new praxis exams and alignment of educational leader certification requirements to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators. The recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Virgilio. Second by Ms. Bophy to approve as notice of intent. Any discussion?
I'd like to just make a comment.
Yes, of course, Mr. Lee.
I think this was an excellent study, and I think it will make a difference. But I think this is the only way I know to say it, for Louisiana, it's going to increase the requirements for certification for superintendents. And I think with time, it will improve the quality, but it's going to be tough.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Any questions? Department or superintendent? Any opposition to the motion? I hear none. Motion passes. That concludes.
This concludes your agenda for the E committee.